Wow, what a dramatic intro the TV man just had. Now, did you see him do that? Well, keep watching again. What? He had this fade in. What?
Feedback stream on Wednesday was pretty dramatic.
Oh, okay, I missed that one. Well, there's a lot of important announcements to make at first, and so I should so everybody please pay careful attention. First important announcement is that the textbooks have arrived at the bookstore. This Writing Mathematics well is there, and the second important announcement is that since you now have a textbook, I have now given you a homework assignment, and the homework assignment is based in part on the textbook. So the homework is going to be due 2 weeks from today, but I recommend that you begin work on it now, just so that you can come and talk to the TAs when they have office hours next week and the week after that for any problems you have understanding it. So do you have a copy of this handout that gives the homework assignment? Please raise your hand if you do not have the handout. Please raise your hand if you do have the handout. Ah, got response. Great. Okay. So now let me explain the idea of this homework problem. In this book, which you'll find is not difficult to read it in a short time, there's an appendix at the end, and he talks about the use of symbols. And this is an important lesson to learn when you're presenting any mathematical argument. And so he goes through a case study, and the point of his case study was to take an article that had particularly poor use of symbols and replaces it by improvement. And in this he has, for example, before and after. Before is in this kind of brackets and after is this. So for example, he replaces this symbol by this one, thereby eliminating the letter C that you didn't need, and having another notation that's equally good. Then sometimes he can replace this symbol by this symbol, which in other words he doesn't need it at all. And so he took the article and simplified it down. And he came out with an article which he sort of only hints at, but it is left with a simplified version. Now I read this appendix and I thought, well, I can't just give you this. I can't just say now take his simplified version and simplify it once more, use the same ideas again on his version, and come up with a better one. But that's your assignment. But what I did was I decided to give you a simplified version. In other words, this is what I'm presenting here is what I think Gilman is saying is the simplified version of the original proof. And now what you're supposed to do is start with this and then rewrite it. It goes on up to here, and rewrite it in a way that makes the notation yet better. You see that the notation still has cases where T sub n super A sub k, which would be nice if we could do without it, and various subscripts and so on. Now he was reacting to the original article, which had in it which he thinks is the all-time champion for the most complicated symbol that ever appeared in a paper, and he said actually it was printed correctly. Sierpinski must have climbed into the printing press for a last-minute check. Now Sierpinski was a great mathematician of this century. In this book, Concrete Math, I'm writing, I've got one reference to a paper he wrote in 1909 and another reference to a paper he wrote in 1959. So he was a prolific mathematician for a long period of time. Actually, his name has a accent over the N if you spell it properly. And this was the original paper that Gilman used in his article to base his appendix, and the monster symbol appears right there. And Sierpinski, being Polish, so he has sort of a Pixius quality. He used another one down here. Okay, so now the thing was, Sierpinski being a great mathematician, still his notation was so bad it confused him. and there was a bug in his proof. And so so a few years later, there had to be a correction to the note of Sierpinski by a Japanese mathematician. This came out to what, 36 or 37 or something like this. And so now he revises the paper, and we still have the same formula, but he at least gets a corrected version of it, and he goes through and makes all kinds of other things which turn out to be unnecessary. So Gilman took this paper, rewrote it, and the rewrite is what I give you here is the beginning of your homework problem. Your job will be to rewrite it again. Now I'll give you a couple of. First of all, the subject of the mathematics is not trivial. I mean, Sierpinski wouldn't publish something that any freshman could do. But still, it doesn't involve anything other than functions and sets. It doesn't use calculus. It doesn't use complicated ideas of logic or any particular. Everything is sort of self-contained in this proof. If you know what a set is and what it means to be a countable set and a one-to-one correspondence and a function, these are things about sets that they taught in the new math, and so maybe you got it somewhere along the line in your education. If not, the TAs are here to help you out and explain this. Like a function is a procedure, and you know. Now, the other thing is, why did Sierpinski work on this at all? And that's because one of the big unsolved problems of mathematics at the time in the 30s was the so-called continuum hypothesis. This was, is there an infinity between the continuum and a countable set? Is there? So a countable set means that it's in one-to-one correspondence with the integers. A continuum means it's in one-to-one correspondence with the real numbers. Now the question is there anything infinity in between there? Is there something that had more elements that couldn't be put into one-to-one correspondence with a countable set, but still could not all be put into one-to-one correspondence with the real numbers, but was a subset of the real numbers? And this was an unsolved problem. Well, Sierpinski is showing that if you could do, he's trying to prove this. He's trying to make a step towards proving it by saying if you could construct something, then you could prove the continuum hypothesis. So the theorem says has a hypothesis in here, and don't worry if the hypothesis seems hard to satisfy. It might be impossible to satisfy. I think we now know that it is impossible to satisfy, because the conclusion is that then the continuum hypothesis is true, because he says any uncountable subset of the real numbers will be mapped into the real numbers by all but finitely many functions, and that means then that any uncountable subset would have as many elements as the real numbers, and this would prove the continuum hypothesis. So anyway, this is the background, but you don't have to understand the theorem in order to do this homework exercise. You just have to reproduce the mathematical argument, and even after you've done so, you might not have any idea why Sierpinski thought of this argument or anything like that. You might be able to do it, but it's mostly an exercise in writing where you're trying to some of these things are in logic can't always be psyched out in the same way as things in physics where you can sort of push something a little way and it's still approximately right. In logic, if one little it's like a computer program. If you lose if there's one weak link, the whole argument breaks down. But this sometimes makes logical things harder to use in intuition. Anyway, the main idea here would be to try to find a way to recast this so that the idea of the proof remains the same, but the notation is much better, and the proof actually will then get shorter, and it'll be clear what Sierpinski did when you solve this problem. So come back with, if you don't understand the assignment, ask me next week, but don't ask me Thursday night, the night before it's due. This is a 3-unit course after all, and so and I gave you this first homework assignment. But this assignment will be graded. So do your best on it. And what we'd like to do is actually have the best possible, for the first time in the history of the world, the best possible proof of Sierpinski's theorem. And this is something also that you find when you're doing any other mathematical writing. Certainly if you're ever writing a textbook, you have you're going to have somebody else's work that you're trying to find an exposition of, and you want to present it in a way often better than they did, because they were so close to it they couldn't see the same way as somebody like you who's being able to look at it and be able to make a simplified presentation of the basic ideas. So you look at the essence of this proof and find out what is really necessary, what really is the structure of the argument, and then once you find that, you could choose a notation for that structure. It's sort of like late binding in computer science, where you don't declare something until you know what it has to be. What it has to be. Don't introduce a subscript unless you or a superscript unless you're sure that it's necessary. Sort of a clue as to this homework assignment. Okay. So any other questions on that? Ask me next week. Another thing I brought with me today is the resource books that I work with all the time as I'm writing. I wanted to show you some of these things that are available. Depending on how much writing you're going to do, you should consider purchasing some of these for sure. And many of you will know these things, but let me start with the biggest one first. Do people know what the OED means? OED is Oxford English Dictionary. Now, this is a dictionary that started out in about 100 years ago, and is supposed to really be the definitive source of information about the English language. And a wonderful project is going on now in Canada to put it all on computers, and they say that maybe next year will be the year, and so on. And they have a lot of good computer scientists working on this, and the people in England been very active, continually gathering sources. Now you can, if you don't need it very much, then you can always go to the library to use it when you need to. But otherwise, there's a lot of book clubs that you can join, which give you this for a free subscription to their book club or something like this. And it's a compact edition. It's also known as the squint print edition. It comes with a magnifying glass. Now I don't know how much you can zoom on this one. I bet you can't get it, because it really does give you a headache if you look at it. You can almost read that. Wow, said of the agent. I can see. My goodness, I can see that on TV. I can't read it in front of me here in the real thing. But anyway, this is 16 volumes condensed into 2 or something like this, and it gives you the citations of how the word was used back in history, as far as they know, and so that you can see all kinds of different things. Now, if you have to find for example, if you have to find a weird quotation about any subject to impress your friends and something like this, when I did the trivia hunt last year, I needed an old use of the word bite, and so I looked up bite in here, and here it was in Chaucer. So for historical references, also just, it's very interesting that they chose the quotations well for the different words. Then there's this supplement which has come out in 4 volumes, and they cost, I don't know, I think more than $100 a piece. So you don't necessarily have to buy them, but I really love this. And so this tells you, this is, for example, was published last year and brought the whole dictionary pretty much up to date. Let's see, let's look up supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. Yeah. This is when I had to look up to find out how it was hyphenated, because I was using it as an example in the textbook. In fact, I needed it before the book came out, so I wrote to them, and they sent me, they gave me a chance to look at it. Yeah, here we go. So here's the word, and so now and then here it turns out that they have this reference to 1949, unpublished song title Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, and it turned out then that here's the reference from 1967, decisions, U.S. courts involving copyright. The complaint alleges copyright infringement of plaintiff's song by defendant's song. Okay, and All variants of this tongue twister will hereinafter be referred to collectively as the word. Okay, so you know there's a lot of good stuff in this Oxford English in the OED. Okay, and all right. Another dictionary that I use a lot is this American Heritage Dictionary. This one is you can see that I use it a lot by looking at the cover of the thing. And this one was based on lots of input of contemporary texts that they then processed through a computer and used it. But the main unique features of it are the usage notes that they have, which are especially helpful. Now, as I said the other day, I looked up replace by, and I couldn't find one on that. But a similar thing was compare. Let me look up the word compare and see how. And the question is, what do you say? Compare it to something or compare it with something? Must be on the previous page. And so here's an example that says used with to, see usage note below. Here it says used with, see usage note below. So usage note, okay. And there's many usage notes in this, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of usage notes. So it'll say, and then they had a panel of about 150 people called their usage panel, and they sent them, then this guy, William Morris, the editor, sent out to the usage panel a questionnaire saying, how would you consider this acceptable or not acceptable? A long questionnaire. And so one of the things on his list was compare to, and so 71% of the usage panel would say that it's the only way to say when you're representing a similar or likening. So compare a voice to thunder. You wouldn't say compare a voice with thunder. In such comparisons, the similarities are often metaphorical rather than real, and so on. So then it says compare with is the only acceptable form in the sense of examining in order to note similarities or difference. Compare Shelley's poetry with Wordsworth's. Okay, and here are the things that compared are of such and such. So informally, to and with are often used interchangeably in these examples. In formal usage, only compare with is acceptable in the intransitive case, being worthy of comparison. Promises do not compare with deeds. You would never say promises do not compare to deeds, even in informal usage. So that's what, in other words, these usage notes are give you also a percentage of how many people would feel about this this particular way. And so that's a good thing. The other really neat thing about this is the appendix that takes it into the Indo-European root words, and so it'll say see para in appendix, and so you go back to the appendix here, and the appendix will tell you all the different words that are like that use para, that use this that come from PERE, and this is just endless amusement to learn about the language. And so you get words like parcel, compart, repartee, and compare is in here, coming from it. And the word pair with the same, all these words, parimutuel, somehow deriving from the Indo-European root like this. And it's a good way to understand language by going into this appendix. So that's a lot of fun too. Now another dictionary that somebody sent me when I was working on the tech project, and I didn't discover it myself because it was given to me by a man. But I really find it very extraordinarily useful as I'm writing this book, Concrete Math. Now it's contemporary English, and it's very good for really the words that people are using now. If you want to look up a historical word, you won't find it in here. But if you want to find out what people are saying, like if you're a foreigner who wants to learn what the language of the street or the language of that you hear every day, this is actually very good because also the definitions are cast in very simple English. And I was trying to, as I was writing a couple of days ago, I wanted to use the word mind-bending or mind-boggling or mind-expanding, and I was trying to think of which of these would be the right one, and I wanted to figure out what the usage was. So I looked it up in Random House Unabridged, I looked it up in OED, I looked it up in American Heritage. They didn't have these words. Mind-bending was not in any of those dictionaries. So I looked up here, so they have mind-bending, they have mind-blowing, mind-boggling, and mind expanding, and so on. So all these terms that really weren't in these other dictionaries was explained here rather clearly and so I decided not to use any of them. But anyway, this answered my question as to what I wanted to do for usage for the language of today. So I like this dictionary for that purpose. My wife tells me she uses this book at least once a day. This is I mentioned that some people are the way they learn to read or something means that they aren't that good at remembering the spellings of words, and so this has the most used words of English, and it's at the point where, and you can quickly scan it. If you don't know how to spell it, you can find it pretty quick. The one that and so she says this is it was a pretty cheap thing, and it was quite convenient. So she recommends that. And now the very very important one. I have two of these, one at home and one at school, because I'll be doing writing in both places, is to have a thesaurus. I hope everyone knows the use of this to find synonyms for words. You look up you look up a word, and let's look up mind. I don't think mind-boggling was in this one either, but let's see where it is here. So you look it up in the back part, which is like a dictionary. Of course, online would be better. You see, we have some things here. We have mind-blowing, mind-boggler, mind-boggling. So we could look up then mind-boggling under 920.12. And so back in the first part, 920.12, will be astonishing, amazing, surprising, startling, astounding, and so on. And mind-boggling gets in there. Okay, so you got references to other similar words, and then those will lead you to other ones. Now the thesaurus is something that I use in many different ways. Sometimes I know there's a word for something, I just can't think of it, so this will lead me to it. Otherwise, I'll have a sentence where I don't want to use the word values over and over again, or a paragraph where I've used a certain word, and I need another word for variety. Otherwise, it's too boring. Of course, you can, if you choose the wrong word, it's terrible. But the thesaurus will help you find it, find the word that you can't remember. But a less obvious use of it is actually in computer science or your work. You're doing some research. You need to make a definition of a term that doesn't have. You have to choose the right word for something. I mean, there's a word like stack, for example, which we use in computer science, and there's a word like heap, which we use in several ways in computer science, unfortunately. But somebody had to decide to call this a stack, and somebody had to decide. In fact, Dijkstra says that he used the Dutch word for stack for this purpose when he was starting to program. But there's many times when you're writing a paper, you have to make up a term for something that's going to be used elsewhere. That term is going to be a good, and you have to be careful when you do this, because if the work you do is at all important, people are going to be starting to use this term. It's going to become some entry in a dictionary someday. It's a big responsibility. I didn't realize this at first. I just chose a term that was the first one that came into my head, and I guess I had a notation LR of K for certain kinds of grammars, and there was no. And when I did this, I didn't put any thought to it at all. I just needed the symbol to use for a concept I was using in my paper. Then afterwards, I found out that there were a lot of there were lots of other papers being written using this notation. I didn't really care for it very much. If I probably would have thought of something much better. So 4 or 5 years later, I thought of another LL of K to go with LR of K, and RL of K and RR of K, to make these all meaningful. just in order to sort of justify the notation I had inflicted on the world, so that it wouldn't be too terrible after all. Many other, but when you choose a word, it's useful to it's important to try to consider that's the right word. And so, like I was working on the web programming system for literate programming. We'll be talking about that next week. There was I didn't have a name for it for a long time, and I had to find a name for this system, and played around with a lot of different ones, and used the thesaurus to chase down all kinds of different ideas as to which aspects of it. There's a bilingual aspect, and so we tried to find. We had various candidate names, but using a thesaurus to help you invent the right technical term is an important resource, I think. Well, I can't live without a thesaurus nearby. So I have one this is one I have at Stanford, and I have another one at home in my chair where I usually write. Any questions on this, David?
I got one question. That OED supplement, that's just
what?
The OED, the
OED supplement
that you showed us, is that going to be one day incorporated into the OED?
In this new version, it's all. In fact, one of the things in the supplement I noticed is they would say delete parts of the original dictionary, that they now have a better, they override some of the things in here. So the supplement. I asked Mary Claire that. She goes frequently to work with them, I think. So yeah, well, I don't know the dates of it, but they have a computer program for typesetting it called Gödel, because OED appears in Gödel's name. Typesetting is quite a massive complication for typesetting, because there are many references from Arabic and other things, and like many other different scripts have to be represented among all the definitions. Okay. Now, what? Are these in TeX? No, this is well, maybe Gödel uses some of the algorithms of TeX, but it's not. No, they could have put it in TeX, I suppose, if TeX had been finished earlier, they might have done it, but they started that project quite a long time ago. But they just I think it was maybe 8 years ago, they finally decided to destroy the type. They had saved all this metal. Every page was set in metal type, and there was some place in Oxford where these were all stored, and because they thought they could never ever have it redone again, but they didn't know what to do because these supplements were coming along. So finally they decided to melt the type all down. Ask Mary about that. That's what I've heard. I'm not absolutely sure about what.
So how much would you have paid for it?
For a page of this? Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. I bought a couple of things like that before they were melted down. I have a font of Zop Optima type, for example, and so on. We're going to do our Christmas card with it.
Question?
Okay, yes?
On the topic of dictionaries,
Yeah.
do you have any comments on British spellings versus American spellings, and especially when books might be of an international character?
Yes, one of the few papers I wrote in foreign language was when I published in the Canadian Journal of Mathematics, and I was talking about coloring, and so it was spelled with a U in this paper, and there's in the Labour Party and so on. So there's licensed many other words that are spelled in different ways, and so I got a note. There's a new journal coming out next year called EP-OD, which means Electronic Publishing something ODO. I can't remember what the ODD stands for, but it's and the editorial and they have American and British editors both. And so he said that Americans should write and spell their own style, and British should spell their own style, and you would mix the two in one article only if you were talking about the labor of the British Labour Party, and then he had some examples where he mixed, of a sentence where you had to talk about the UK defense establishment and the US Department of Defense in this, and you would spell them in the way of the the country where they really are. Is that answering your question? So if you're those are understandable that you would use that. There's also, of course, choices of words, especially when you talk about automobiles or something like that. Everything changes. The boot instead of the trunk, and you get into a lift. My kids, when we went to Norway, people would tell them to mind the traffic, and they didn't know that this meant watch out for cars, and so we had to be with them, even though people were speaking English to them. But it's okay to write in your own version of English, whatever is right for you.
So is it true then you'd always default to, let's say, a Merriam-Webster or American Heritage spelling versus the Oxford, for instance?
I would, in my own books, yeah. In fact, yesterday I had to figure out how to spell dominoes with an E or without an E. And I looked and I found overwhelming preference was to have the E in there, even in America. So I kept it in. Let's see, what was I going to say? Some other question came up. Yeah. But it's your audience who is going to be the one that's if you think the audience wants the other spelling, then you should write for them. I did write when I was in Norway, I wrote an article for publication which is sort of like Scientific Norwegian, the equivalent of Scientific American in Norway, and I tried to write something that would be good Norwegian, although I don't know the language very well at all. So then I decided also I would keep track of how many of my words actually survived into the final thing. But when I chose symbols, for example, I was talking about an algorithm that had a left and a right to it, and so I wouldn't use L and R as the abbreviations, but I would use H and V, which were for the Norwegian words Høyre and Venstre, or that's V and H. So you choose single letter names also based on something that will be conceptually relevant to the reader. And after I wrote what I thought would be reasonably correct with all the knowledge I had studied of the grammar and everything, I showed it to a friend of mine at the Math Institute who was who went over it and polished it for style, and then we sent it to the editorial office, which also goes through and rewrites everything again the way Scientific American does. And so in the final draft, and I underlined in red every word that was mine, and in green every word that was Ul's, and left the other ones, the new ones, or brown or something. And my own came to about 30% of the final, and it was about a three-way split, I guess, equally so. Didn't get through. And when I do it here, right now I get almost 100%, I think. I mean, it would be between 95 and 100 for sure coming through now. But I don't know. Okay. Any other questions? Matt, yeah.
On contemporary usage, when you wrote, in concrete mathematics, there's a section where it goes through a proof. Yeah. And at the end, it concludes, it's like it's talking to the judge in the people's court, whose name I can never remember.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
I got that from my son. I asked him who would be McInerney was not the one, but we changed it to Judge Wapner, because, and I just said to John, what would be a good judge to use for his generation? Yeah. That was your question. Okay. Yeah, people's court. Is that? Yeah.
I just wondered, I read it. And I kind of knew what that was, but I wondered, maybe somebody 10 years read the book and says no.
Yeah, I have no idea. But Orrin had another judge's name in there, and I asked John if he knew that name, and he said no. So that was the judge when you were on jury duty. Oh, okay. So you were probably on jury duty when you were writing that chapter. Okay. So this is the way you remembered it. Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of parts of the textbook that all of a sudden they have Welsh examples, because that was the month I went to Wales and things like that. Yeah, so those little traces appear in books, don't they? Now, so speaking of concrete math, I have a few more notes in here of the things that I noted as I was going through this before and after. So let's try to get through this. The first thing I wanted to mention is something again, very often when I'm doing the editing for flow, I find I'll break up a sentence by changing the semicolon to a period. So here it says the next one is a bit more difficult, and then I decided to stop the sentence and new sentence. It can be reduced to van der Waals convolution by a sequence of transformations, but we can just easily and so on. Somehow when the first draft, it sounded like I wanted a semicolon here because I was going to get through something quickly, but afterwards it was really so separate there was no point in trying to join the two or getting any logical relation between the two. Now another thing here, I started a new paragraph, right. This symbol means, switch to a new paragraph here, because here, let's look at the context. Before moving on, let's look at proofs for two more of the identities in table 3, and it's easy to prove this one, and then I was going to, if I could finish in the same paragraph the proof of both of them, then fine. But it turned out I didn't get. I got through the proof of the first one in one sentence. It was sort of a trivial thing, but the proof of the second one was going to go on for a ways, and so I might as well start a new paragraph there. Then, in order to reinforce the structure of the whole thing, then I added a new sentence here. A new paragraph here, so much for table 5.3, and so then the structure of that part would be clear. Okay. Once again, here's another place where I change a semicolon to a period. I started, and usually you don't start a sentence with the word "and," but if you're set up for it, it's okay to break that rule once in a while. Pronoun reference. Two things about this derivation are worthy of note. First, it's a great convenience to be summing over all integers k. Now that's bad. It sounds like it's this derivation. It's a great derivation. No, this derivation is a great convenience. No, it's just this sentence by itself might be fine. It's a great convenience to be summing over all integers k, but not when you're talking about this derivation so clearly there. So I had to rewrite the sentence so that a completely different structure. Okay, another problem in mathematical text is that you get long formulas that don't fit. And displays, it would, in fact, look, let's see, where do I get, here's one, you see, it's overlapping the equation number. So this is going on top. So so this symbol means to me, break it into two lines, move this down, so second line, so the second line is all there, and there's room for the number. Now, if this is something that the author of a paper can do better than somebody who doesn't understand the paper, the author can sometimes change the whole formula so that it doesn't need to be broken or something like this. And so that's one of the nice things about that typesetting is coming in now, that I think a matter of exposition in how to break a display can actually, I think it's worthwhile for the author to put those few minutes into it. It does improve it over something it would be if this would be done mechanically. But then you get to a formula like this, which even after I put it on the second line, it's too wide. So I either have to change the mathematics, introduce a new symbol. I could introduce the symbol D, capital S for A plus B plus C plus D or something like that. Or in this case, I noticed that really there was a lot of space around these plus signs I didn't need, so I just closed up around all the plus signs, and there was plenty of room to get it in. So properly, here is another formula that was too wide. I could get rid of some space in the plus sign here, bringing these two parentheses a little closer together, and it would fit okay. Sorry, I had to fiddle with this. Now, anybody working with this is my page talking about the hairiest sum of binomial coefficients known, and this is my idea as to what the champ is. And so no wonder I had a little trouble getting it into the line. Question?
Yeah, when you're breaking it, I notice you're taking the equal sign down to the next line.
Yeah.
Is that standard then? Always?
Yeah, that's standard. It's funny. The rule for in a displayed formula is that you start the next line with the operator equals or plus or whatever. But in text it's the opposite. In text you leave the equals at the right hand margin, and you begin the next at the left. The rule it's just backwards, but that's the way it's most commonly done. Okay, more of the same. Here was a case where as I was reading this the second time, I noticed that I didn't want to use the letters A and B. Later on, there's a B in the next page here. That was conflicting with other things that I would be using. So I decided to change it all to Q and R. A to Q and B to R in this whole discussion, which goes on for several pages. So this is an example of the great advantage of text editors, where you can make a systematic search for everything with A with a subscript, and you can replace it and be sure that you've got them all. It was much harder to do that in the old days, and so we can improve. Otherwise, it would have been such a disincentive to make the change. I would have probably not come up with as good a book. What did I note here? Here it says a sum involving two binomial coefficients. It says, wait a minute, where's the second binomial coefficient? And but I don't know why. This is similar to what I noticed before. When I read this at speed, I didn't catch I didn't catch the point of this question here. And so I added this, where's the second binomial coefficient named in the title of this problem. But I like the general idea that Oren put in here, because it has a nice break in style. It keeps the thing lively to do this. And the whole point of this was then that we could rewrite this K as a binomial coefficient. K choose one, and it was going to then be a better approach to a problem we already had done before. Let's see. Here's a case of tense. I solved the problem two ways and got two different answers. And so let's see, was zero. What do I mean here, though? The sum was zero in all cases. Our other path to the solution told us that the sum was zero in all cases. And since it isn't, I said usually if there's a statement of fact, it should be present tense all the time. But it told us that the sum was zero, but it was actually it wasn't a fact. It was only a fact that we believed at the time. So I think was is the proper tense here, but it's a problem. Let's see, bad break. Here's another case where I had a large formula that had to be broken between lines. Now in this case, this is a very bad place to break after this minus sign, because of the it's a 4 tuple here, and so I inserted a word. I inserted the word equation here. So I would have, when I originally wrote it, it was just namely 521, but now it says namely equation 521. And then I told Tech that in this case it would be okay to break after this comma here. Usually Tech will never break after a comma. It usually looks wrong. but this time it was okay. So I think if I go to this, let's see how it came out in the after version here. Round 7. Here we go. Okay, so actually by inserting that new word equation there, the tech was able then to figure out, to actually work the thing out by hyphenating the word in the first line and stuff that was forbidden to do before. So it now found a way to do it without breaking after that comma. So okay, now there's not too many more things here. Here's an example of a case where I decided to display a formula that didn't look right because I had to break it. You know, here it was breaking in the middle. It would have been okay to break after the equal sign, but it didn't work out, and I didn't want to insert any more words. Besides, I realized this formula could darn well be displayed, and so this formula is now displayed, and that solved the problem. Also fixed up the end of the paragraph rather well. How are we doing? I still got a little bit of time. One of the most common errors that I think mathematicians make when they get their own typesetting system is to overuse the form of fractions where you have the numerator over the denominator, as opposed to the slashed form of the fractions where you would say 1/2 instead of 1/2. Now this doesn't look extremely bad here, but I changed it. I think it looks better. 1/2. Let's see if we can compare the two before and after. You see that one there, and here's the new one. I think it's a little easier to read there in that way. But what mathematicians almost always overdo the use of trying to put a fraction in the text with tiny little numbers over the other one. And here, since it's already in the upper part of a small type, this one goes into the small type instead of the. Moral of this is to convert fractions to a slashed form when they're in text. Typically, this is something that copy editors of math journals do. That's the one thing in mathematics they know a lot about. They don't know really what the mathematics means, but they know the difference between they know that when they go 1/n + 1, they have to do that as 1/ and they have to insert a parenthesis to get the n + 1 in there. They know enough about putting in a parenthesis and taking out in slashes, because that's one of the most common changes that a copy editor of a math journal has to make. Here was a example I just wanted to say where sometimes I went the other way and actually changed the period to a semicolon. This sentence here, I had a period and started a new sentence, but I did feel as I was reading it through that I wanted to go at high speed through this and have the key that the second part of the sentence was really joined very much to the first. So I did. So I don't always go the other way. Semicolons aren't necessarily always evil. And more of the same kinds of things over and over again until we get to the end of the chapter, exercises. I just want to say a few words about exercises. That this is where you have to be especially careful as you're writing, because you're giving somebody something with no context to base it on. So you can't be ambiguous. Any teacher who knows when he's given his first exam will find out that the students are solving different problems than he thought they were asked to solve, or something got a lot harder because he thought something was obvious and it wasn't. And so when you're stating exercises, you've got to be especially careful to have a bit of enough redundancy in there the person won't misunderstand the point of the exercise. For this reason, exercises are the hardest things to translate into another language. And there's a book, a famous book called Aufgaben und Lehrsätze aus der Analysis, the Polya and Sago book that came out in 1924, I think it was. It was one of the best books of the 20th century, It was 50 years before that book was translated into another, more than 50 years, 60 years I think, before the book was translated into any other language. Finally, the English language edition came out. And it's because it was just so darn hard to translate. Every problem was sort of, had to be done with just the right amount of nuances that a reader would understand it. And if you've ever done a translation project for yourself from another language, you realize that when you get to the exercise parts, it's the hardest part for you to understand. It's hardest to understand a newspaper headline if you're going to a foreign country otherwise, because you don't know the jargon of those headlines. So exercises, special care is needed. The answers to exercises is another change of style. Here we drop a lot of the rules of exposition because we're trying to be brief. We only need to give enough of a hint that the answer can be reconstructed. We don't have to write the answer with a great deal of sugary exposition as we do in the text itself. So, for example, I start out a lot of things with a symbol. F of k is a polynomial. I would never do that in the middle of a proof, but I do it in the answer, no problem. Another thing I should mention about answers is exercises is sources. Now, I've got, these are I hadn't run the bibliography file up to date, so these were new sources as I was proofreading this. But nowadays there's a copyright law that's different from the way it was when I started writing The Art of Computer Programming. And I'm not supposed to use anything in my book that I don't credit to its source. If I use an exercise and give a problem in a book that was somebody else that has appeared anywhere else, I should give credit to that person, get permission from that person to use it officially before I do this. Now mathematicians haven't been suing each other for using their exercises in text so far, and they're just usually just delighted to be named, at all. But you should credit them, and I'm not going to write letters probably to everybody asking for permission, but I think theoretically I should, and if the publisher insists on it, we'll have to delay the publication of the book until these letters come back. So this is, but it's a good idea to credit sources. In fact, it's been very frustrating to me to try to trace the history of so many subjects in mathematics, and somebody will say this is Lagrange's inequality, and where in the heck did Lagrange ever publish it? And I still haven't been able to find it. In fact, I spent 4 hours looking through his collected works and wasn't able to find that inequality anywhere. So having sources, I think, will be a good tradition. It'll be much more easy to trace down the history of these things than it was in the past. Okay, see you next week.